Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the World Migratory Bird Day webinar of the EAAFP, the East Asian Australasian Flyway Partnership. My name is Vivian Fu, the Senior Communication Officer of EAAFP, and I will be the moderator of today's webinar in the first part. Before we start, I would like to inform you a few housekeeping rules so that we can enjoy our webinar the best. First of all, please mute your microphone unless you are invited to speak. And please use the chat box at the bottom. You can see an icon of chat. You can leave your message or questions and comments to the chat so that we will collect them and respond to them later. Please note that this session is being recorded. And if you do not wish to appear in the recording, please turn off your videos. For those of you who joined our event for the first time, I would like to brief you about what we are talking about. What is a flyway? And first of all, you can see the 9 major flyways in the world, and in the middle is the East Asian Australasian Flyway. And it is one of the biggest flyway, which the migratory water birds fly between the breeding and the non-breeding seasons or non-breeding grounds. And it stretches from Russian Far East and Alaska all the way down to Australia and New Zealand. Because there are over 250 species of migratory water birds, the East Asian Australasian Flyway Partnership was established in 2006 to provide a flyway-wide framework to promote dialogue, cooperation, and collaboration between a range of stakeholders at all levels. And our aim is to conserve migratory water birds and the habitats and the livelihood of local communities relying on these wetlands in the East Asian Australasian Flyway. As we know that there is a growing water crisis is now an urgent global problem, and its impact is not only to human but also lots of biodiversity, including migratory birds. And such impact is amplified with other issues like climate change. So to raise the awareness of the importance for protecting the migratory birds and associating with the different environmental issues, the World Migratory Bird Day is a global awareness campaign to highlight the ecological importance of migratory water birds, and it is also the EAAFP key activities. The World Migratory Bird Day is convened by the Convention of Migratory Species, CMS, the African Eurasian Migratory Water Birds Agreements, AWA, and Environment for the Americas, EFTA. And this year in March, the EAAFP was also announced as the official partners of the of the World Migratory Bird Day. So we are now officially promoting World Migratory Bird Day as a partners this time. And this year, the theme of the World Migratory Bird Day is water. And the slogan is Water, Sustaining Bird Life, to highlight the importance of saving waters and conserving aquatic ecosystems. But how could migratory birds play a role in awakening people's awareness on these issues? So today, we are very honored to invite an incredible speaker, Ms. Sacha Dench, CEO and founder of the Conservation Without Borders and Ambassador of UN Convention on Migratory Species. And we are also joyfully having Mr. Chris Rostron, International Engagement Manager of our partners, Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust WWT, as the Q&A session moderator. So during the presentation time, please leave your questions in the chat box, and Chris will address your question during the Q&A sections bringing your question to Sacha. And now let me go back to introduce our speaker of today, Ms. Sacha Dench, Australian-born biologist and a conservationist. She is, as said before, the CEO and founder of Conservation Without Borders. She's also the ambassador of the UN Convention of Migratory Species, given her long, more than 15 years of work on conservation. Sacha is an adventurer, named as Human Swan for her paramotor expedition following the migratory routes of migratory species, like the Bewick swans, all the way flying from Russia down to the UK. And as her organization's name suggests, Sacha and her team work on conservation despite the geographical and political borders. Such a champion in conservation communication. Through her journeys, she brought the stories of migratory birds and promote the importance of collaborative actions to conserving biodiversity and address the climate change issues. So without further ado, let's welcome Sacha.
Thank you very much. So you've done the introductions, have you?
Yes. So
okay, great.
Today,
okay, so hang on.
Yeah, it's your chance. We know that you have also new ideas of working in the East Asian Australasian Flyway. So here we have some great audience with us, and maybe they can provide with you some great ideas and stories for your new projects.
Give me 1 second. So what I was hoping to go through today was obviously it's coming up to World Migratory Bird Day. The key thing we'd like to do is to inspire lots of other people to feel empowered to do something. And whilst the ideas that I'm going to talk about are some pretty big ideas, whether they're small ideas, big ideas, we would like you to end this presentation feeling inspired to either go and take forward some of your own big ideas. I can see Millie has joined us in the audience, and she's obviously gone and done that. But also show you that actually smaller ideas in an area can be really, really important for changing the world. So it doesn't take a really big idea. The other thing I want everybody to keep in the back of your mind is that even if you aren't the person with the great idea, being the person that backs the person with the really big idea can also make all the difference. So wherever you think you are and whatever your skills are, that's the key thing for us. That everybody feels inspired to do something, because that is the only way we're going to shift things fast enough. So I was going to run through basically give you a summary of the projects that I have done, but then take one particular project and talk about what it's like, what it's like to fly with birds, as the title of this suggests. But also where the idea came from, how I convinced a load of people to help do it. Also, hopefully inspire a lot of you to have other ideas. So I guess I'll start with a summary of the ideas that I've had. So yeah, as was mentioned by Vivian earlier, I'm an Australian-born biologist. So I used to be completely working on marine species, came to WWT and got inspired by migratory birds. And I'm going to say something which is quite embarrassing to a lot of people. When I first started at WWT, I thought it was the Wildlife and Wetland Trust, and it was about a week in that I realized it was Wildfowl and Wetland Trust. And this, for all of you interested in birds, this is going to be the piece that will make you cringe. My first feeling when I realized that wildfowl was actually ducks, geese and swans was, are these all kind of domestic? These sound to me like domestic species. How am I going to make those exciting? And I'm really, really sorry for saying that, because it didn't take more than a trip out to a wetland site called Clavrock in Scotland. I was journeying out there with some media, and I was going to show them the barnacle goose spectacle. And suddenly the reserve warden said, "Get down." So we had to duck down behind some bushes, and then 25,000 barnacle geese flew over our head. And I was filming at the time, but the expletives from all of us over the top of it meant that, the audio wasn't particularly usable, but it was the most spectacular, moving thing. And then I thought, gosh, actually, migratory birds could be really powerful. They could be a really powerful way of inspiring people with nature. Okay, so that was my very first introduction. And then, so I've gone on from then to Fly with the Swans. Vivian's mentioned my title is what have been known as the Human Swan, a title that I resisted for a long time and then realized actually it was very useful. And after the Swan project, I went on to, as I was flying in a paramotor, I went on to do a slightly different project, which was trying to fly around the UK in an electric paramotor. And that was because on the Flight of the Swans project, I'd seen that actually climate change was one of the major issues, but I'd seen it, I was aware of climate change, but it wasn't until I did a journey with migratory birds, went from the Arctic extremes, and met a load of different people and saw the world from a bird's eye view, that I really got to see tangibly what that means, climate change impacting birds. I saw lots of tangible examples that I thought were really interesting. And in that, I thought, I need to try to not use a petrol paramotor. Can I use an electric paramotor? And I also thought I can't be traveling to lots of other countries talking about climate change when in the UK, we've certainly got a lot that we can still do. So I really had to focus on that. The other thing that some of you in the audience, if you're from Australia, might have as a similar experience was between the Flight of the Swans and flying around the UK, our family home in the Australian bush was lost to the bushfires. And that was also a time when I thought, actually, the climate change has got to be something we really focus on. And then I had a good hard think about whether migratory birds was really where I needed to focus my efforts on, or should I just focus on climate change? But as I was saying before, actually, I've seen that the stories of birds, the way they can bring people together, are so impactful that actually, and they give you a really good insight on the big issues like climate change. Okay, so yeah, on the back of that, then we carried on, and I wanted to then follow the rest of the flyway. So Vivian showed you earlier a map of where all the flyways are. The journey that I did with the swans was up in the Russian Arctic. I then went on to continue that flyway down, but following a different bird, following the osprey. And that's where I am at the moment. I am on my journey back from West Africa. So now I want to just give you a little insight into the Flight of the Swans project, which Chris was very heavily involved in. Right, so I'm going to give you a little insight into what it was like with the Swan expedition to start with. So sometime back in 2015, I think I found myself working at WWT and being asked to, well, I was in the capacity as a communications expert. So I was being asked to help them look at the migration of the Buick swan. So there were many researchers in different countries who had a reasonably good idea of all the different threats to the birds, and the numbers were fairly shocking. We'd lost almost half of them in the previous 20 years. And there were lots of different threats. However, if you added up the impact of all those different threats, the decline in the birds was still greater than all of those. So somewhere they knew they were missing something. The other complication with the Buick swans, as many of you will know from other migratory species, is that there were different threats in different countries. Obviously, there was the challenges of different political and different kind of cultural borders. But one of the things that I found most interesting was that, in fact, it was very easy for every country to say, well, there's not really any point me doing my bit because all the other countries aren't doing their bit. So in order to really have impact for a bird like the Buick swan, you had to get lots of countries willing to act together, which is not a simple thing to do. It's brilliant that organizations like this are there trying to do that. So we had all these different challenges. And so I sat there and looked at all the threats, and it was a pretty grim story. We were losing swans due to lead poisoning. We were losing them due to hunting, power line collisions. All of that was a really grim story. How do we get people to be excited about hearing that? And then I looked at the map. And at the time, there were several swans with GPS tags on them, and there was a swan called Hope that was up in the Arctic. And I looked at that whole map and I thought, God, I've said many times before, the swans migrate from the Russian Arctic to the UK. But then I tried to really picture in my head what that looks like. And then I realized the swans are migrating from the land of the polar bears, from the reindeer breeders. They're crossing some of the wildest, most remote wetlands of the north. Then they're crossing the dense taiga forest. And as they cross into Europe, the landscape completely changes to being agriculture. There's more infrastructure, power lines. The weather's getting stormy, and the whole time, even the young birds have got this icy winter on their tail. And we know, because many of the birds have shot in their tissues, they're also being shot at. So could you turn this around and make it a bit of a James Bond story for the bird world? And I know you've heard that before, because the spoonbill sandpiper, I think we've said, also has a very similar migration. And I did work on the spoonbill sandpiper before 2016. So that was the story I wanted to tell. And I sat there thinking, God, how can we bring that story to life? I've also grown up in hunting communities, so we knew that hunters were one of the groups that we needed to reach out to. And I thought, actually, I've grown up in hunting communities. I know many hunters that are would be devastated to think that they were helping to cause the decline of a species. Most people in the world aren't that bad. How do we get through to people in a way that makes them want to be part of this story, wants them to be part of saving the swans? And so, yeah, but it was a complicated issue. So I was initially being asked to bring people to meetings to talk about all the different issues. And if you think about that, the industries we were trying to reach were the energy industry, they were the hunting industry, and that's local people. That's also big industry, that's also hunting tourism. And we were also trying to reach people in agriculture. And so, yeah, many different industries. How could you bring them all to meetings and do it fast enough? And I thought, actually, you can't do it fast enough for a bird in decline like that. And if that sort of decline is happening for the Buick swan, a big white bird that people can recognize, what could be going wrong for all the other species? So yeah, we had the potential for this James Bond story for the bird world. And I thought about the idea of, and I didn't come from a bird conservation world, I'd thought about the idea of putting small cameras on birds. Could that work? And that was obviously never going to get through an ethics committee. Could you instead have camera people staged in different areas? And I know that had sort of been tried before. And then one day I found myself doing aerial imagery for WWT. We were reconstructing or bringing back a wetland in the west of England. And I found myself flying with a new wing at the time and doing about the same speed as the swans were doing crossing the channel. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then I sat and thought about it, and I realized, well, actually, that the only way that you could, one way that you could potentially bring this whole story to life was to fly with them. And yeah, this was the swan called Hope that I was there to photograph her having her collar on. And so, yeah, and I realized the only way that you could really bring this story to life could potentially be in a paramotor. Now, you can look at that and realize this is not designed for international travel. You are essentially hanging off a big piece of fabric with a fan on your back. But there are a few really key elements for me. One of those was that in a paramotor, you are flying at similar speeds and altitude as the birds. You also suffer many of the same challenges that the birds face. And one other key thing is when you land pretty much anywhere in a paramotor, particularly as soon as I take my helmet off and people can see that I'm a female, they tend to ask three key questions. Isn't it dangerous? Where have you come from? And how can I help? And I just thought that was the perfect opening for a conversation about saving the Buick swan. So, but I sat on this idea for a long time. As many of you will know, with big ideas, they can be scary. They can be scary for me, but also scary for a lot of other people. So I sat on this idea for a very long time, and a couple of months even. And then one day I just found it kept me up at night. And so I got up and I wrote up a one-pager and I sent it off to a couple of the key researchers at WWT. And yeah, I got back the answer that I thought I would. You are totally mad. Followed by, but this is so mad, it might just work. And so at that, I then had to try to figure out how to bring this project to life. And so what many won't know, at WWT, I think people didn't realize at the time that no one had flown across the Russian Arctic. I thought there was probably a few people that had flown in a few places, but I also had to struggle with there being lots of water to fly over, some potentially quite extreme conditions, and also incredible cold. So I think we calculated that the coldest it could be is minus 22 degrees. In fact, in the end, I only got that flying at 3,000 feet above the English Channel. So yeah, with that, I tried to put it all together, and I had another key issue was that in order to fly across the Russian Arctic, you needed to have the permissions to fly across 5 of Russia's heavily protected border regions. So yeah, with that, we tried to get permissions in various different ways. And then eventually we figured actually what we need is some really high impact ambassadors. So I had on the left, David Attenborough came on board as a patron. And then in the middle is Sir Ranulph Fiennes. Many of you won't know him, but he's well known in the UK as an explorer. And with that, so I was in touch with our fixer, who eventually was like, well, great, but many Russians don't know who they are. Don't know if there's any Russians in this call. But what they do love is James Bond. And we've noticed that your last name is Dench. Is there any reason, any way that you could be related to Dame Judi Dench? And who is known as M in the James Bond films. So with that, I contacted one of my relatives, did a bit of research and found out that we are distantly related. My great-great-grandfather is her great-grandfather, but I'm from the second illegitimate wife, a lady called Bessie from Battersea. So with that, I went back to various different people, and eventually we got a response, which was, we can't exactly give you permission because there wasn't really a way of giving permission for that, but we won't stop you as long as you follow a few certain procedures. So with the help of Judi Dench, we eventually got permission to set off. And with that, I wanted to give you a little sample of what it's like to try and fly with the birds on migration. So I found myself up in the Russian Arctic, hoping to have a few days before the birds set off on migration. And the plan was, we already had GPS collars on about 12 different birds, but I'll only talk about a few. And the plan was always that when the first bird sets off on migration, that will be a sign that there's some cold Arctic winds. I might be a bit slower than the birds, so I should set off with them. I was up in the Arctic ready to, hoping to have a few days to prepare. And then a couple of days later, suddenly, I got a call saying Daisy Clark is on the move, you'd better leave. So with that, I packed up, and now I'm going to give you a short example of what it's like to fly with the birds. So sit back and imagine you can feel the reassuring hum of a motor and a propeller behind you. Above you is your paraglider wing, and you're connected by loads of fine lines to the wing, so you can feel its every movement. And as you fly on across the Russian Arctic, the crazy colors of the tundra are below you. As you fly on, you look down and you see small groups of swans here and there looking up at you. And you can see there's plenty of water plants there still for them to eat at this time of the year. And then you constantly scan the horizon for Arctic foxes, polar bears, anything else that might be a potential predator to the birds or to you. And if you get really nervous crossing this wild landscape, cross your legs. It does absolutely nothing in terms of flying, but for some reason that's vaguely reassuring. And if you get really nervous, practice reaching down for your reserve parachute, which is somewhere down near your right bum cheek. And then you look across to the right and you see a big flock of birds, swans. But hang on, are they swans or are they geese and swans flying together? If geese and swans, and the geese are legal quarry, many geese are legal quarry in this part of the world. If geese and swans are flying together, could that be one of the reasons that so many swans are being shot? And you make a note of that. And then as I was flying along, suddenly I looked aside, and it was incredible to be flying at the same height as birds, looking at how their head stays dead steady as your body is, the wings are flapping so hard. And then you notice that 2 birds have broken away from the flock and they're moving closer and closer towards you. And you realize that actually you might be on a converging path. And as this was happening on one occasion, I reached up just about to pull on my left brake to do a rapid turn to evade them. And instead of colliding with me, they actually tucked in behind my right wingtip, and they flew along with me as though I was the lead bird in a flock. For about 5 minutes. And for those 5 minutes, for the first time, I really did feel like the human swan. Absolutely magical moment. But we had slightly different missions. As the as the birds flew on to try and find the next wetland rest site, my mission was to stop and talk to people. And I was in landscapes where I was dwarfed. That's me in the bottom right, that tiny little figure. So my mission was to stop and land and speak to people and see what we could learn. And just so that you know, behind the scenes, I wasn't going into it completely cold. WWT staff had done a survey of an anonymous survey of different communities in the Arctic to try and find out where hunting might have been happening and why. My mission was to land in communities and find out more. Why could this be happening? Who are the most important people? Who are the influencers in a community? And what you'll find with a paramotor is when you land as an unusual and unexpected human being, the person that everybody turns to see what to do is often the influencer. So my job out there was to try and find out a bit more. And just to be clear, I had a Russian paramotorist with me as well, who was able to do the translations for me. So what would people think of me, this big white blonde woman landing in communities? And I am huge compared to many of the people of the Arctic. Would they, especially arriving, talking to them about hunting when they're all hunting communities, would they be angry and shoot at me, as many people in the UK had said? And I found actually the complete opposite is the case. When you land in a community, and I arrive, I don't look like the superhero that you might be imagining, swooping in. I would land, take my helmet off, and I've been flying for a couple of hours in the Arctic. It's cold, it's wet. I probably have snots dried on my face. I've got bad hair, and I'm red and shivering. And people's reaction isn't to push you away or be scared of you. The first thing they always do is say, grab you inside. And in the Arctic, it was wrap you in a reindeer skin, offer you potentially hot cranberry juice or a reindeer blood pancake or something similar. And what I found was in that sort of environment, you develop trust and warmth quite easily. And then within no time, because you're prepared to do that much to try and save the swans, people tend to ask or to be asking themselves, what can I do to help? And that we found repeatedly. So yeah, people, reindeer blood pancake. The other thing, some of you may be in the Arctic and have eaten raw rotten reindeer meat as well. But basically, as I was flying with the most basic of reserves, people also offered you everything that they had, which was pretty impressive. So yeah, this sort of carried on. I haven't got time to give you the whole story of flying all the way across the Russian Arctic and back to the UK, but I did want to give you a couple of examples of how flying with birds can bring about change, but in lots of different ways. So obviously we were creating a really incredible story. All the way we had local media and national media getting interested as well. So many people said before I set off, the Russians aren't interested in conservation, or certainly not on national television. By the time we left Russia, we'd had 82 pieces on national television. So they weren't just kind of slightly interested. If you create a story that people want to talk about, the kind of story, and I tend to use as a judge, is it something that somebody will want to tell their mate in the on a Friday evening? Guess what? Blah blah blah. If you can create an amazing story, that's what it takes. The other thing was basically raising the profile of different people. But also telling stories. So how did we tell stories? Was I going into communities, for example, the hunting communities, saying, we know that you're part of the problem, 30% of the swans have got shot in their tissue, we know you're part of the problem, we need you to stop. Like, it's a pretty boring story, but also you already painted them as the demons in this story. What we had to do was create ways of making everybody who was part of the problem also, because it's the reality, see that they could actually be the heroes of the story. Actually, me doing this little flying trip, that wasn't the hero, it was the people we were meeting. So, for example, with the hunters in the Russian Arctic, we started the whole expedition by bringing a load of people into the room together, and I asked them to help me cross the tundra. They were the ones that had all the knowledge of the area. And so I had various different people from the hunting communities come and help with that. And in doing so, they were, once we had them helping us with the expedition, they were very quickly also asking, you know, how can we help the birds? If you care so much about the swans, maybe there's an issue. And we also had an open friendship where they could ask me questions that they were genuinely asking. So they said things like, well, we know that the swans are protected, but we always thought that was just because they're in fairy stories, and you Westerners are like very cute about wild animals, like here we have to live by hunting. Is it just because they're in fairy stories? And others said, well, we know you said the numbers are declining, but we don't believe that you can actually count that. How do you do that? So I could explain actually how the counts happen in Europe, but this conversations had not happened before. And then how do we know that it works? Well, I have many examples, but one in particular was a guy who runs a hunting tourism operation up in the north. He came to Julia and I once with the brochure for his tourism outlet, and he showed us a brochure and he said, I can see on the front of it, there was a family sitting around barbecuing a couple of birds on a fire. And he said, I know that they're Buick swans, and I'm really sorry. I just had no idea. I had no idea that what I was doing was actually helping the decline, and I'll help in any way I can. And so from then, Julia and the crew, they've created the Swan Champion Network, and they've done the job of going out and informing hunters, putting information where hunters would see it. Another example would be, in fact, that's it, Chris. I was going to go into a couple of examples now of how change happened. Do you want that? Should we open that up for a question, or should I just carry on and have questions at the end?
Yeah, I don't see any questions yet, but yeah, that's a good prompt for everybody. If you do have any questions, then please do put them in the chat box and we'll come back to them later. But I think, yeah, Sacha, if you're happy to carry on for a bit and then we can do questions at the end, that sounds good.
Okay, great. Yeah, so the other thing actually I wanted to say earlier about how we how does a expedition like flying with birds, how do you help create change? One of the core ways, and it's all about people, is about starting a conversation by creating a sense of awe and wonder. There's all sorts of psychological research that shows that creating a sense of awe. So, but if you were to start a story by saying you're part of the problem, a person's instant reaction is to go on the defensive. And once they're on the defensive, their mind is closed. They're looking for a way out. They're looking to get away from you. If you instead start a conversation by creating a sense of wonder, this sense of awe in a person, and I would say that is around kind of telling stories about the bird migration rather than awe in a paramotorist, but you create this sense of awe in people, and then their mind is in a state where they're more likely to feel like part of a community or want to be part of a community. They're also more likely to be open-minded and thinking of ideas. They're also more likely to change their mind. So there are three really key things with starting a conversation with people. Yeah, so one of the examples of change I'd mentioned was that. So Russian hunters actually allowing them to see for themselves, I could be the hero in helping to change the situation. And it's something that I have the power to change, because that's another really important thing, making people see that they have the power. Yeah, another one was okay, landing in the Arkhangelsk region. I went to speak to a university group there, and we had officials from various different departments come along to the same meeting. We also had the Times media send somebody up as well. And that was really interesting. And there was a moment there where one of the professors said that we're also almost embarrassed that it took a lady from England, well, everyone's assuming I'm English, I'm kind of both, to fly in a paramotor to get us in the room together. How have we never spoken? So this was the hunting inspectorate, and the bird researchers had never actually spoken directly. And on the back of that conversation, the hunting inspectorate offered to send out information to 50,000 hunters with their new licenses that year, explaining to them clearly actually which species were and weren't. And that was another easy win. I'll carry on. So another example. Still no questions, Chris?
We have a couple of questions if you want to take them now. So
are they directly related to examples of change?
They're not directly at the moment. No.
Okay,
So
let me carry on then. I'll give another few examples because I think that is kind of important. So we, let me jump to, say, Estonia. As I flew into Estonia, we were contacted by a lovely guy called Heikki on behalf of his community. They had noticed swans hitting power lines on a bridge that goes between the mainland and an island over years, and they had started to try and campaign against it. They'd actually put up a small camera. Had they at the time? No, they had taken photographs of it. They'd spoken to the power company, who'd basically told them it was too expensive. It's about £10 million to get rid of these power lines, and we can't do that. So we turned up, generated national media coverage for this issue because it wasn't a small issue. There we're talking hundreds of birds dying a year and many different species. The power line had been built between two vast wetland areas, so and in the worst possible area, also the worst possible design, power lines that were running across 6 different levels and had no diverters on them. So we arrived and made a bit of a noise about it. We got it on national television. We highlighted the fact that actually this was of global significance. They were having an impact on a species. We also included it in the film and got the film of Flight of the Swans played on Estonian television. We got a message a year and a half, I think, later from Heikki saying for him on top of a cherry picker, saying, thank you very much. The company have now removed half of the power lines and put diverters on all of them. And then not long later got another message saying, and now they're going to be burying the entire lot of power lines to go underneath the river. And yeah, he credits that to us basically being able to shine a spotlight on him and his group. And literally all they were doing was taking photographs of an issue and saying, this needs to stop. But they didn't have a big enough voice, or nobody realized actually that it genuinely was significant. It wasn't just a couple of small environmentalists getting upset about their local issue. So just by shining a spotlight on an individual or a small group, we've, I would say, had an impact on a species with in that way alone. I will carry on. Another example in Poland. Our partners in Poland on this expedition, as I was at one evening, they called up and said, we really need, so for any of you who don't know, the use of lead in shooting, many birds eat the lead pellets that are spread around the ground. So there's one issue with shooting, the other is lead poisoning from spent lead shot that's left around. Poland and Ireland were the only countries in Europe that still had no restrictions on the use of lead, even in wetlands. So that was an issue there. Our Polish partner called up and said, if you can land in this field at 9:10 in the morning, we can get this on national breakfast television, so we can reach a really broad audience. And so I was happy to do that, landed and had the camera shoved in my face and spoke about lead poisoning, just the basics of it, but all hell broke loose, as we say, after that, because it shocked a lot of people. So people were calling, the members of the public were calling the Hunting Association saying, you can't possibly be allowing lead use in wetlands. The Hunting Association were calling the media office saying, you can't speak about this. This is not true. I think they hadn't quite understood what the real issue was. And the media were then saying to us, you know, oh my God, this is dreadful. There's a chaos has been created. Ministers are being called. And my answer to that was, why don't we just invite everybody to a meeting, to dinner? And at this point, our partners in conservation had actually never spoken directly to the hunters, only in media fights. And the first reaction was that they would never agree to come to dinner. But what do you know, that evening at 8 p.m, they arrived for dinner and we sat down and had a civil conversation. And we had a conversation in which we talked about the different issues around lead poisoning. And at one point I realized that their spokesperson really hadn't understood that it's about, the issue is lead that the birds are eating, not lead that's been shot into their body. So she kept saying, we don't illegally shoot swans. It's like, this is really not the issue. But I could have belittled her and said, you really don't understand the issue. But instead I explained to her what it looks like for a bird that has eaten lead shot and is being autopsied, all the different injuries to it. It's been dragged around. You know, the first one that I saw had bloody fronts of its wings because it's had to drag itself around with its wings because its legs didn't work anymore. Its entire throat was choked with food. So it wasn't any more able to swallow. And I could get through to the part of her that maybe does care about the welfare of animals and also didn't make anybody feel stupid. And at the end of that conversation, I can't say we solved a huge amount of issues, but at least they said, we can't believe we've never spoken before. And they sent representatives to our Swan conference the next day. And those off the record had said, we can see that this is that lead is has got to go. It might not be an easy thing for us to change everybody's the hunter's opinion directly, because it's something they've been doing for a long time, but we can see it's on the cards. So at least we had a few key people seeing that there was at least understanding what it was, and seeing that we weren't demons, we weren't just out to try and belittle them, we were actually looking for solutions. At that point, shall I carry on, Chris, or do you want to have a
there's a couple of questions coming in, so we might just have a quick look at those, if that's okay. Braja from India was asking if, well, he was just commenting basically that the wetland community used to hunt birds, but has been converted into protecting birds now. And I don't know whether, Braja, whether you want to just tell us a little bit about how that happened. Because I think that that's definitely one of those things that was a key result from some of Sacha's work. So Braja, do you want to just give us a bit of background?
Yeah, am I audible, Krish?
Yes, you are. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this is, of course, this is what Sacha has done a wonderful, I mean, it's a different expedition, but in Chilka of India, a lot of migratory birds come, millions of migratory birds, and they, the local community used to hunt them and sell them in the roadside eateries. Okay, and some the bird lovers and some environmentalists started dialoguing with the community. Okay, they said that if the migratory birds are there, then a lot of tourists will come. You can take the tourists around and make good amount of money instead of killing the birds. So, and the fish population, if the birds remain there, the fish population in the wetland will increase. So you'll get the fish population, good fish population, as well as a lot of tourist, eco-tourist will flow to the area. So the income of the local community will increase. So that is how, with a constant, intervention, community dialogue for a couple of years, now this same community, they don't, they in fact have become really protector, and hunting has been totally stopped, and they are making very good income out of tourism. The footfall has been increasing day by day, the tourist footfall, eco-tourist, and the fish population has gone up significantly. So that is very interesting. And I have written a small case study on this. I can share this. Yes.
Yeah. And that's it. That's how I guess I would like to make a couple of comments on that. One of those is the value of local knowledge is hugely important, but also I'm sure that the way that those community were spoken to, I'd mentioned the value of making people feel like they could be the heroes of a situation. But also in places where of really low income, then showing that there are alternatives, and also making those alternative funding streams visible to people is really, really powerful. So that's a great example.
Brilliant. Thank you, Braja. The next question then is from Jen Pettimenti, wondering if this kind of research can assist with research into the impacts of wind farms on waterfowl. And Sacha, I don't know whether that came up during your expeditions.
It did. So wind farms for the swans on migration. I think that was the wind farm research from WWT actually funded the original most of the GPS collars on birds. So the great thing is that work was done, I think, before sighting some of the wind farms in the North Sea. But I think they found that the turbines themselves weren't the main issue, weren't really an issue for the swans, just the way that the swans fly. However, the network of power lines, when I researched the future plans for the next 10 and 20 years for infrastructure within Europe, it wasn't the wind farms necessarily, but the power line network that was going to run all the way across from Eastern Europe to the Baltic, for example. You're crossing the entire flyway of migratory birds. Or an example I haven't mentioned yet is being able to understand why. So I think many people can't get their head around why so many swans die on power lines, because surely the swans can choose the altitude, and in a vast sky, the power lines are at a particular height. What you can see from flying with the birds and on a migration is that actually during the autumn migration there's quite often very low cloud cover, so birds are being forced to fly quite low. Also, with the loss of many wetlands, birds are no longer, they used to before the 70s, I think, they used to be mostly roosting and feeding in the same wetlands. Now the wetlands are smaller, they're mostly roosting in water and then going out to feed. So that's early morning, at dusk, and then at dawn they are flying at quite low level between farmland and between wetlands, bringing them into direct contact with power lines. But also the when you are, I know power lines are sort of visible for us, but if you're flying at a bird's eye view and the power lines are against dark ground, it is impossible to see them. Even as a pilot, you're looking at the pylons and making a guess at where the power lines are and flying above those. So unfortunately, certainly in the autumn migration, that is definitely an issue, and one that lots of people are focusing on.
Yeah, that's good to know. I know certainly there are examples of power lines being undergrounded, aren't there, so that they're not such a problem. Just a question to everybody then. One of the key things we want to know today is if Sacha was going to do a similar type project in the East Asia-Australasia Flyway, could that help you with your work? What are the issues she could be dealing with? What are the local stories? So any comments on whether, you know, Sacha visiting you as part of this type of expedition would help you would be really helpful to know. Terry's just making a comment. 100% agree that when people know about the incredible wildlife around them, they will get on board, and lessons you've given about how to start conversations with people without alienating or blaming them is really useful to get buy-in. So that's good stuff. There is a question from Fire Tablet about issues in Britain. So in Britain, hunting organisations and conservation groups often work against each other. Have you had conversations with these groups in the UK?
Yes, that's a very big question for yes, and it has been. I think that's been a big learning for many of us at WWT, looking back at the history, for example, on the lead poisoning issue, of years of mistrust. But it then only takes, I think we've got to a point where a few people within the hunting industry, or a few people within conservation, found ways to develop trust situations with a few in the hunting industry, and ways have been seen through that. But I would say, whilst I think the hunting media have been fairly dreadful in the UK, some of them have admitted that their belief that everything that conservationists were saying was just to try and get rid of them, and it was all lies. There are, hopefully that is changing. And I would say in the early days, the conversations were started badly with probably done in the media, where first examples of, for example, you know, a knowledge that lead poisoning was killing a lot of birds was potentially done in the media, where people instantly felt attacked. And from that point, it's quite hard to get back to a point of actually discussion and, you know, can we help each other here? Because when you look at the big picture, whilst hunting is vital to a lot of conservationists, in the big picture, hunters generally need there to be enough wildlife there to be able to hunt. But yeah, it's probably about trying to make sure that you start conversations in a way that you have the best chance possible of getting collaboration rather than conflict.
Definitely, yeah. And it's that kind of project that, as you mentioned before, bringing people together using unusual means is often quite a good way to start that conversation, and finding that common ground, I think, definitely something that needs to be done. But you see many good examples like Ducks Unlimited in the Americas, who do a lot of work on conservation and hunting together. So it's definitely something that can work. Kind of question on background then. Alex is asking, very inspiring, how did you train for the expedition and how long did it take? which I guess maybe a project in terms of how you prepare for a similar thing in the EAAFP.
Can I answer the question? So it took a long time. I'd say probably took a year and a half, a couple of years to prepare for it, but use the preparation time can also be really part of the project, so part of the communication. For example, in the run up to Flight of the Swans, I had to do things like go and practice having my wing collapse, and also for a potential water landing, which is considered fatal. I had to practice how to land in water and with an engine out. But we were recording these and telling the story of why and how the Swan might do similar, and sharing that with media across the Flyway. So before I left, we'd had media coverage. Before I started the expedition, we'd had media coverage in most countries, and I'd had responses. So we had a Russian paratrooper, for example, write me a long email of how he thought he had actually been dropped in the Arctic in water many times, and he wrote a long email describing how he thought I should prepare for that. So we the preparation, talking to people about it, is think about all of that as actually being part of the project, not a long delay before you start. Just getting those conversations going is part of it. And to be completely honest, at the beginning of that expedition, I was still thinking the chances of being able to do this are really slim. But I could still say that at least it was working already, because we already had people talking about the fact that swans were migrating and someone was going to try and follow them.
Definitely, yeah. And from our perspective, because we did some work kind of connecting you up with local groups and organizations in different countries, didn't we? And that was quite a good period of time where we could get people warmed up to it. They could arrange meetings and they could prepare to host you for things. One other question, I think, from my side, I guess, is that you relied a lot on local people to kind of support you with this, local groups to kind of be helping you with translation or providing you places to stay, all of that kind of thing. So again, for people on this call within the Flyway, you know, would you be willing to support Sacha when she arrives in your country or in your site? And I guess that's another thing, Sacha, that you relied on heavily, wasn't it? The support from local groups.
Absolutely. And I would say it was really important for it to be a collaboration with the local group. So in reality, we are bringing a story. We're bringing the story in a bird's eye view. But for example, when the media show up, they might want to have 10 seconds, 20 seconds, a little bit of me talking about flying with the birds. But then when it comes to the important issues, they'd rather have that in a local language. We also are really just trying to highlight or add influence to the issues that local partners generally already know. We're not bringing that much that's new, and also showing that this is something of global interest and significance to the other people around them. So raising their influence. That is really what it's about, bringing people together and making a story so that everybody can see that what's happening right here in your local area is important and worth putting some effort in, and that lots of other people are helping as well. So overall, can we have a much bigger impact? Can I add, I don't know if there's any more questions, but I just wanted to,
there's just a couple. I know we're kind of running out of time. One technical one: what height and what distance do you fly at a stretch?
Anything from 50 meters to 3,000 meters across the channel, because across water you need lots of time to prepare for a possible water landing, which you need a couple of minutes for.
Definitely. And one from Lisa, suggesting that you come to discuss issues of reclamation. Is that something that's big on your list? And also if you've seen impacts of solar panels on wetland habitats.
Reclamation. What do you mean by reclamation?
Reclamation, so basically reclaiming land from the sea. So taking mudflats and then draining them and filling them so you build on them.
Okay. So I'm not sure what the actual question is there. I mean, yes, it's an issue in lots of places, but also we've also seen where that can be reversed or wetland habitat can be created. The Netherlands has some really impressive examples of that. But again, it is amazing still how many people really don't understand that mudflats have got any value whatsoever. How comfortable people are, even politicians are, to call it wasteland. I think trying to tackle that is one of our big issues.
Definitely, yeah. So we're coming up to the end of the session. I'm going to pass you back to Vivian in that case to wrap up. Vivian, I don't want to overrun too much, but thank you, Sacha. That was amazing, inspiring stuff as ever.
Yes, Thank you for Sacha, for your wonderful sharing of your stories and all the inspiring good examples and the encouraging like how much people are engaging and changing their mindsets and make a change in the Conservation Act. So thank you very much, Sacha, for being with us, sharing all the inspiring stories, and thank you for Chris for being the wonderful moderator, and all of you staying here for over an hour and giving a lot of good responses, ideas, questions. So it's now really up to you to again reach out to Sacha later on to share any ideas of or good suggestion for Sacha's next projects. So yeah, if you like, there is a you can also use a emoji to clap hands. Yeah, for Sacha and Chris for being the moderator. And then I would like to remind you all, tomorrow is the big day, is the day for the World Migratory Bird Day. And yeah, we would like to suggest you to click on the QR code here so that you can get all the materials for the World Migratory Bird Dates. And there is also a Trello board from the with all the partners of the World Migratory Bird Day. You can also click and share and use all this material from the Trello board. And yeah, we may also put a link here in the chat so you can also download it. Oh, also there is a 12, we have translated with our partners and focal point to 12 languages in the Flyway for the global poster. So you can also click on this Trello board to download all this whenever you are. And then next is, of course, tomorrow is the World Migratory Bird Day. We encourage and suggest you all to go out to the nature and see the birds yourself. And you're welcome to join this global big day. And we have created a EAAFP team. So if you are using eBird, you can also record your bird list and then share with EAAFP team. Then you will be part of our team to join this global bird watching events. And then lastly, there are lots happening in these few days and also extending to next week. So please follow us at EAAFP and in all different social media channel and also our website. And you're also welcome to leave your message here with us even after the webinar, and then we can deliver it to Sacha if needed. So yeah, I think that is the end of our webinar today, and I hope you all enjoyed, and happy World Migratory Bird Day tomorrow. Thank you very much.